Oh, good morning, protege, or of course, good afternoon to my wonderful and favorite afternoon 8th period class. Hey, I hope this direct instructional Zoomcast finds you well. I can't believe I'm saying this. This is it. This is going to be my last direct instructional Zoomcast, my last lecture, on World War II. Holy cow, where is time gone? So you guys know the drill at this point. Make certain, again, you have your ISN open, right side, next clean sheet of paper, new day, new date. Make certain, again, the top right-hand corner. This, of course, is my last direct instructional Zoomcast, and it is for Friday. Thank gosh, everybody. And it is February 25th, 2022. Let's get into it, shall we? So again, I'm going to share my screen with everybody. And what I would like everybody to now do is make certain, again, you have your ISN open the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. Again, I'm going to respectfully ask you, I know you've got your highlighters and your correctable tape on your desk, and I really applaud, again, your ambition and wanting to be proactive, but I'm going to ask everybody to refrain using your highlighters and the correctable tape during the direct instructional Zoomcast. It is more important that you are focusing, listening, taking those really good copious notes, not just the main notes, but also some in addition to those oral notes as well. And of course, when you're done with the Zoomcast, which is not going to be as lengthy as a usual Zoomcast, you'll have a chance to go back, clean up, and highlight. All right, so here's your topic heading. Write this down. So our final topic heading is going to be President Truman's tough decision. So here's the dealio. So way back in April of 1945, America was stunned. They were stunned because of the fact.
Looking for to be on Zoom at 1:30 on Zoom. I'm not going to be checking where you're zooming from. We'll see you at 1:30 on Zoom.
So Harry Truman is the new president. So as I was stating, in April of 1945, the country, the United States of America, the world for that matter, was shocked because Franklin Roosevelt had died unexpectedly at the age of 63, if my memory serves me correctly. So Harry Truman now is the president of the United States of America. He was, again, Franklin Roosevelt's vice president during his fourth term when he was reelected for a fourth time in, of course, 1944. So Harry Truman witnessed VE Day. He witnessed victory in Europe on May 8th, 1945. Now, certainly there was a lot of jubilation throughout the world because the Nazis and Hitler had been defeated. But the Japanese had continued on fighting. So if you remember with my last Zoomcast, you learned about, of course, the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And it's really important to understand these two battles in particular, because what these battles do is it's going to make Harry Truman's decision even more challenging. So the decision is basically how do we get the Empire of Japan to surrender unconditionally? That's the big issue. So at this point, Harry Truman has to think back to what has transpired. So you go back to February, you go back to March, and you have the Battle of Iwo Jima, which you will learn about in my last Zoomcast. So at the Battle of Iwo Jima, there were 22,000 Japanese troops that had been stationed on this volcanic island. When this battle finally ended, over 18,400 Japanese soldiers were killed. Only 216 Japanese soldiers were taken as prisoners of war. So again, it ties into something that I taught you before. The Japanese, as part of the Japanese culture, the whole concept of, again, bonsai, 10,000 years, they're not going to surrender. They will fight to the death. So then Harry Truman finds out we have the subsequent battle after Iwo Jima, and that's the Battle of Okinawa. So that picks up where Iwo Jima left off. So Okinawa, again, on the way on our road, this is all still part of the Leapfrogging Island Hopping Campaign. So this battle starts in April. By June of 1945, it ends. Over 110,000 Japanese troops were killed during this long battle. But here was the part that was really, really most eye-opening. is the fact that, again, you were not only dealing with that, you were also dealing with, of course, sorry about that. Let's continue on. So again, you not only are you dealing with soldiers that were killed, you're also dealing with anywhere from 40,000 to 150,000 Japanese civilians also were killed, because again, they are also embracing this concept of bonsai, again, 10,000 years, fight to the death. So now between those two, Harry Truman, again, as a president of the United States, or as the president of the United States, this is why presidents, when you look at them after 4 years or 8 years, they age so rapidly, because the incredible stress that this job brings every single day. So as a result of these two battles, if you would please write this down, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, this again is still part of the island hopping leapfrogging campaign. Harry Truman now has two tough choices, to make. So number one, you can continue with this leapfrogging campaign, this island hopping campaign. Now remember, Okinawa is now under 500 miles away from the mainland of Japan. That's going to be your next target. So here's what would happen. You would then use Okinawa as a staging island as part of this island hopping campaign. And you now have, and I want you to write this down, this is what's called Operation Downfall. So Operation Downfall was planned to start by November of 1945. It was basically going to be a full-scale invasion using Okinawa as a staging point and basically launching a full-scale invasion of the mainland of Japan. And the numbers are absolutely astounding. So number one, two of our big commanders in World War II were going to be instrumental in organizing it. Chester W. Nimitz with the Navy, and George MacArthur overseeing, of course, the Army. In addition, some other numbers to throw at you. You're looking at over 2 million American soldiers were going to be involved with Operation Downfall. Not only that, but also you're looking at approximately 42 aircraft carriers would be used to transport troops, and also airplanes would be flying off. Remember, what aircraft carriers are acting like is basically a makeshift airport, and 24 battleships. This would be the largest, again, invasion of a country focusing on the sea in recorded history, even beyond what we did with D-Day at this point. Now, that's option one. But there are problems with Operation Downfall, okay? So problem number one is the fact that, unlike the Nazis, by the time we get to Operation Plunder in March of 1945, the Nazis pretty much knew that the writing was on the wall, and they were looking for ways. They were sending signals out by March, April that they were interested in negotiating, especially with the Brits and the Americans. The Japanese are showing no signs of surrendering unconditionally, even after the Battle of Okinawa. That's one issue. Number two, so estimated casualties. So this is Operation Downfall is supposed to start by November-ish, okay, 1945. So basically, the planners of Operation Downfall went to Harry Truman and said, this is what we're estimating we're looking at in casualties. So number one, again, we had over 2 million men that were, again, positioned to invade Japan. We were already estimating there were going to be a million casualties, dead, wounded, missing in action, prisoners of war. We were estimating, because you're not only fighting the Japanese military, but you're going to be fighting Japanese civilians, fighting to the death. We were estimating that there would be potentially 10 million Japanese casualties, dead, wounded, missing in action, prisoners of war. And I have one other point I want you to add on as a side note. It was also estimated that Operation Downfall might take up to 10 years in order to complete this mission. It would take until 1955 for the Empire of Japan to formally, unconditionally surrender. And if you're Harry Truman, are you willing to deal with this number of casualties? And will the American people support World War II continuing on for another 10 years? I'll let you think about that. And at the same time, images like this of Japanese civilians, again, picking up whatever weapons they can possibly find to fight back, and more images like this, these disturbing images. This is going to become a lot more commonplace if Harry Truman decides to implement Operation Downfall to defeat the Empire of Japan. On the other hand, you have another option. And the other option is what's called the Manhattan Project. So ladies and gentlemen, if you direct your attention up to my laptop screen, little background information on the Manhattan Project.
General Groves was lying on the ground in the prone position, facing away from the blast. What he said was going through his mind was, what was he going to do when the timer got to 0 and nothing happened?
At 5:30 a.m., July 16th, 1945, the world entered the atomic age with an intense flash, a sudden wave of heat, followed by a tremendous shock wave. The ball of fire extended 40,000 feet, punch equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT, the high end of most of the scientists' predictions, completely vaporizing the steel tower and heating the desert sand into glass for a radius of 800 yards.
What I thought it was, I hadn't thought, the heat of the fireball would heat my face exactly as it's sunrise.
It became brighter and brighter and rose. And I knew that soon it will be used over Japan. And then it will not be just an experiment.
So what you witnessed is, again, this was the counter to Operation Downfall, and that's the Manhattan Project. So the Manhattan Project, I'd like you to draw a line off the side. You're going to have this as a side oral note, is the top secret program. Harry Truman didn't even know about it until well after he became president. As vice president, former President Franklin Roosevelt never even told him about this. The Manhattan Project was the development of the atomic bomb. So as they stated in the video clip, on July 16th, 1945, the world entered the atomic age because this is what's called the Trinity Test. In Los Alamos, New Mexico, an atomic bomb was detonated. So now Harry Truman has a potential another option. So do you potentially go and invade Japan with Operation Downfall, or do you consider using this new weapon of mass destruction? In the video, they mentioned Leslie Groves. You might want to mention his name as a little side oral note. He was the military supervisor of the Manhattan Project. His job was to organize it, to facilitate it, and make certain that confidentiality, that nobody was talking about it. Now, the other key player was a gentleman by the name of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was the science guy. He's going to oversee the nuts and bolts in the development of the atomic bomb. So I'm going to share another video clip with you. This is J. Robert Oppenheimer describing what he thought, what he felt when the very first atomic bomb was detonated on July 16th, 1945 in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Very powerful.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu was trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds. So such a powerful, powerful quote from J. Robert Oppenheimer, quoting Hindu scripture. So now again, you are Harry Truman. What are you going to do? The Japanese have again shown no signs that they're ready to unconditionally surrender. We have launched bombing raids on the mainland of Japan. Still no signs of unconditional surrender. So now in July of 1945, Harry Truman issues what's called the Potsdam Declaration. We're going to talk more about this when we get to the Cold War. It's a final ultimatum to the Japanese. It was basically a warning that the United States had a weapon of mass destruction that potentially would be unleashed on the Japanese, forcing them to unconditionally surrender. So either do it now or face a terrible price to be paid. So Harry Truman weighs the two sides, Operation Downfall, using this new weapon, and so he decides to do this. So I'd like you to please write this down. Sorry about that again. So what I'd like everybody to do is write this down, please. So here we go. So due to the high casualties, so again, here's what Harry Truman is weighing. We learned about the Battle of Leyte Gulf. They're determining who's going to control the Philippine Islands way back in October of 1944. Still part of the Leapfrogging Island Hopping Campaign. Then we go to Iwo Jima. Then we go to Okinawa. Both of these battles still part of the Island Hopping Campaign, 1945. And the casualties keep mounting. And now you're not only just fighting Japanese soldiers, and you're now fighting Japanese civilians. And this doesn't even take into account how many American lives would be lost as well. So he decides, Harry Truman decides on August 6, 1945, Harry Truman decides to drop an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. If you direct your attention to the overhead screen or to my laptop screen, that's a photograph of the mushroom cloud. Again, that starts to billow. That's all dust that's being collected, going up into the atmosphere, again, above Hiroshima, Japan. 3 days later, you have, of course, another atomic bomb that was dropped on another Japanese city called Nagasaki, and that's August 9th, 1945. And if you direct your attention up to my laptop screen, this is what Nagasaki looked like after the bomb had detonated. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to direct your attention up to my laptop screen. This is again from a BBC docudrama. This is a recreation of the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima, August 6th, 1945. The airplane is called the Enola Gay. The main pilot is a gentleman by the name of Paul Tibbets. And what happens is, by dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, you're going to usher in the end of one war, but you're going to also usher in the beginning of another.
And we were on that bomb run for three and a half minutes. Tom and I are talking.
Christ, Dutch, you never sat on a bomb run this long over Germany. They'd have blasted us out the sky. Yeah.
He said, nothing there. No opposition, no nothing. Right there. Just, yeah, sit. Go in and bomb the target.
I saw an aircraft, like a tiny silver drop, entering the sky above Hiroshima. I instantly recognized it as an American plane, as no Japanese aircraft could fly at that altitude at the time. It was just one plane, so I assumed that it was passing by as usual.
I was counting. 1, 2, 3.
Screen of who did that? I was wiping the desktop. That was when the bomb was dropped. Ne-
It took about 45 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded. And I think there wasn't a man in the airplane that wasn't either timing it with his watch or counting or doing something. I was sure the bomb was a dud. I was sure it wasn't going to work.
After falling for 43 seconds, the time and barometric triggers started the firing mechanism. A uranium bullet fired down a barrel into a uranium target. Together, they started a nuclear chain reaction. Solid matter began to come apart, releasing untold quantities of energy.
I don't know if you caught, there was one point where a gentleman was sitting, looked on a stoop, and he was near ground zero. He was instantaneously vaporized by the blast of the atomic bomb. And it was basically his shadow was imprinted into the ground. Unbelievable, unreal. Ladies and gentlemen, skip a full page. I'd like you to go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. Make certain again that you date your notes for today. It is February 25th, 2022. Going to share with you some guide questions. This is regarding VJ Day, victory over Japan. All right, here we go. Number one, I'd like to know what two words of General MacArthur resonated with the Japanese people. I'm going to go through these guide questions relatively quickly because, again, I know you can be able to successfully pause the Zoomcast to give yourself an opportunity to get caught up. Number two, what was the deck of the USS Missouri transformed into? Number three, what was the happiest day of President Truman's life? Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. VJ Day. Here we go.
World War II in the Pacific, 4 years of bloody hell came to an end here. September 2nd, 1945, a solemn ceremony on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. A mighty warship and a peace to celebrate. The ship was packed with hundreds of sailors, Marines, reporters, cameramen, and top military brass with legendary names: Nimitz, Halsey, Wainwright, McCain, representatives of 9 Allied nations, and Supreme Allied Commander General Douglas MacArthur. Just before 9 that morning, the Japanese representatives approached the Missouri. They boarded in silence, took their places, and the brief ceremony began.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion, a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
MacArthur was about to become the interim ruler of Japan, and the Japanese people, defeated and afraid, did not know what to expect until this moment.
I announce it my firm purpose to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance.
Justice and tolerance. With those words, one Japanese delegate later said, the deck of the Missouri was transformed into an altar of peace. The Japanese foreign minister signed the instrument of surrender, followed by the Army Chief of Staff. General MacArthur signed. Eyewitnesses saw his hands tremble. The Allied nations signed as well, bearing witness to the end of the worst war in human history. World War II finally was over.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
At that moment, as if on cue, the sun came out. And as the Japanese departed, a stunning aerial display. More than 2,000 Allied aircraft flew in formation over the Missouri. In Washington, President Harry Truman marked the moment.
The thoughts and hopes of all America, indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight on the battleship Missouri.
It was no accident that the surrender took place aboard the Missouri. The ship was named for Truman's home state. The previous year, then Senator Truman watched his daughter christen the Missouri as it was launched into New York Harbor. Just weeks after the surrender, the ship was back in New York, welcomed by thousands, including President Truman. He visited the spot where the war had ended. He sat at the surrender table to sign the guest book and described it as the happiest day of his life. Today, with this plaque marking its now famous deck, the Missouri is anchored where World War II began for the United States. Mighty Mo now stands proudly and at peace at Pearl Harbor.
Hey, NBC News fan.
So, ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine the exhilaration? Not just Harry Truman, not just Douglas MacArthur, but the American people, when word spread that on September 2nd, 1945, VJ Day, victory over Japan, that World War II was now officially over.
The day of days for America and her allies. Crowds before the White House await the announcement from the president that the Japs have surrendered unconditionally.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. In the reply, there is no qualification.
Reporters rush out to relay the news to an anxious world and touch off celebrations throughout the country. Washington is jubilant, and in Chicago, more than 1 million sing and dance in the streets in the biggest celebration the Windy City has ever seen. Joy is unconfined. It was 4 o'clock Pacific time in San Francisco when the announcement came, and people were quick to leave their offices for an impromptu, spontaneous celebration. But it was in that city's Chinatown where Victory Day was the most joyous. Firecrackers that had been hoarded for years are set off in a triumphant roar. Seattle let loose all the pent-up emotions of 3 years and 8 months of war, and to the victors, the spoils. The pose may not be dignified, but the young lady is not the least upset. Peace, it's wonderful. The Navy photographer gives us a preview of Admiral Halsey's ambition to ride the Emperor's white horse through the streets of Tokyo. Their rallying cry is, "Go to it, Admiral," and so say we all of us.
So as we wrap up this celebrating, and certainly throughout all of the United States, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, the exhilaration that people must have experienced at that point, knowing that after 6 years, the worst war in recorded history had finally ended. It had to be an incredible sense of relief and happiness and a release of joy. But keep in mind that this joy is going to be short-lived because, as I said earlier, As one war ends, another war begins. Now, here's what I would like you guys to do before we wrap up our Zoomcast, the final one on, of course, World War II. I need you to write a reflection for me. It's really simple. One of the biggest questions whenever you study 19th and 20th century American history, especially now 20th century, is Harry Truman's decision. You heard the two options. Go at Operation Downfall, full-scale invasion, potentially of Japan, potentially 10 years it's going to take to defeat Japan, and at the same time, over 10 million potential casualties for just the Japanese. Or option two, use this new weapon of mass destruction, tying in with the Trinity Test in Los Alamos, New Mexico. We, of course, know it as the atomic bomb. There are people, there are historians who believe that Harry Truman made the right decision, and there are other people that believe that Harry Truman made the wrong decision. Some people would say Harry Truman committed a war crime against humanity, that the price to end this war was too high for what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So here's what I would like for you guys to do. Take 5 minutes, and I'd like you to write for me a really nice reflection. Did Harry Truman make the right decision to use the atomic bomb to end World War II? Yes or no? There is no right or wrong answer. I have always said this to my students. I have a very strong opinion about this, but I'll never share it. I never have, I never will. I've simply presented you both sides of the story. Now you have to pick a lane and make certain, again, you provide some details and support. But my other request I have is that if somebody has a differing opinion, please be respectful of them. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I think that's something that we all need to really focus on, being respectful, because that's what makes America a special place. So at this point, I can't believe we're wrapping up World War II. So I'd like everybody to take your highlighters and your correctable tape, and I want you to go and clean up and highlight everything that we covered today in my final direct instructional Zoomcast on World War II. But you're not done. 10 to 15 minutes, I want you to go and review all the information. Take the opportunity, hand your ISN to your mom or dad, create a Zoom session or a FaceTime session with a classmate. You channel your inner Mr. Bonk. You teach the information. Talk about what happened at Iwo Jima and Okinawa in terms of the casualties. Talk about Operation Downfall. What was it? What were the potential risks with it? What about, again, what was going on in Los Alamos, New Mexico? What about the Manhattan Project? Who was Leslie Groves? Who was J. Robert Oppenheimer? What were the two decisions that, or two choices, I should say, that Harry Truman needed to decide on how to end this war? Which decision or which choice did he go with? How did he decide? And how did World War II end? So again, I hope you enjoyed the Zoomcast as much as I enjoyed making it. Thank you again for, I apologize for the distractions in the background as they were making announcements. But again, I want this to be authentic and real. So for my next Zoomcast, so I kind of alluded to the fact, while the use of the atomic bomb may have ushered in the end of World War II, but it also ushered in the beginning of another war, and that's called the Cold War. But that is for another time and another story, another chapter. So ladies and gentlemen, as I always like to say, as I wrap up one of my Zoomcasts, you know, the story may have ended today, but you know the saga is going to continue tomorrow. And the rest, as we say, everyone, is history. Peace out, everybody. Thank you so much. And as always, please be well.